and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really big question. How do children actually develop?
It's fundamental, isn't it? And the first thing to grasp is that there's no single right answer.
Exactly. No magic bullet theory. Instead, we've got, well, a collection of different viewpoints.
That's right. Different lenses, really, to understand this incredibly complex journey of growth and change.
So for this deep dive, we're drawing on some key ideas from the field, kind of like a tour through the major theories.
Our aim isn't to pick the best one, but more to understand what each brings to the table.
Yeah, what unique insights they offer.
Exactly. We'll be looking at 5 main perspectives. There's the psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, contextual, and the evolutionary viewpoint.
Okay.
And our mission really is to give you a concise, clear overview of each one, what makes them tick,
Sounds good. So let's start with that first one, the psychodynamic perspective. This one looks inward, right?
It does. The core idea is that our behavior is often driven by internal stuff, forces, memories, conflicts, often stuff we're not even consciously aware of stemming from childhood.
Right, the unseen currents. And
Yeah.
Sigmund Freud is obviously a huge name here, psychoanalytic theory.
Absolutely. Freud proposed that a lot of what shapes us comes from the unconscious mind. This hitting part holding thoughts and feelings we don't directly access.
And he gave us that model of personality, the id, the ego, and the superego. Can you unpack those a bit?
Sure. Think of the id as the raw instinctual part. It's there from birth, operating on the pleasure principle, wants immediate gratification.
I want it now.
Pretty much. Then the ego develops. That's the rational part, the reality principle. It tries to satisfy the id's desires in realistic, socially acceptable ways.
Okay.
And finally, the superego emerges. That's like our conscience, our internal sense of right and wrong, learned from parents and society.
So it's this constant balancing act inside us.
Exactly, a negotiation. Freud also talked about psychosexual stages, different phases where pleasure focuses on different body parts.
And the idea of fixation.
Yeah, he believed if conflicts weren't resolved properly at a certain stage, you could get stuck or fixated, and that would influence your personality later on.
Interesting. But then Erikson came along and built on Freud's ideas. Or challenged them.
A bit of both, really. Erikson also saw development in stages, 8 psychosocial stages, actually. But his focus was much broader, emphasizing social interactions and challenges or crises that we face throughout our entire lives.
So not just childhood, lifespan development.
Precisely. He took it from infancy right through to old age. It was less about just the psychosexual and more about how we navigate our social world and develop our sense of self at each stage.
That feels, well, more comprehensive in a way.
It highlights that development doesn't just stop after childhood. Each stage presents a new challenge and opportunity for growth.
Okay, so stepping back from the psychodynamic view of Freud and Erikson, what are the main takeaways, the contributions, and maybe the criticisms?
Well, Freud's massive contribution was highlighting the unconscious, that forces beneath the surface matter.
Right.
But a lot of his ideas are hard to test scientifically, and his theories were based on a pretty limited group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Erikson gave us that crucial lifespan perspective and the focus on social factors, but his stages can sometimes seem a bit vague, and like Freud, his work has also been critiqued for potentially having a male-centric bias, historically speaking.
Okay. Let's pivot completely then to the behavioral perspective. This feels like the opposite, focusing on the outside, on what we can see.
Totally different angle. Behaviorists like Watson and Skinner said, look, let's study what we can observe, behavior and environmental stimuli. They weren't so keen on inner forces or even universal stages. They saw development as more continuous, driven by learning.
Learning through association, that's Watson's classical conditioning, isn't it?
Exactly. A neutral stimulus gets paired with something that naturally causes a response, and eventually the neutral stimulus triggers the response on its own. Think Pavlov's dogs, or a baby getting excited seeing a bottle.
Simple association.
Yeah.
And Skinner, operant conditioning.
Skinner focused on consequences. Actions followed by rewards or reinforcement tend to be repeated. Actions followed by punishment tend to decrease.
So reinforcement strengthens behavior, punishment weakens it.
That's the core idea. If a behavior works, you do it more. If it leads to something bad, you do it less.
Makes sense, like getting praise for tidying your room versus getting grounded for breaking curfew.
Precisely. And then Albert Bandura added a really important piece with his social cognitive learning theory.
Which is?
He showed we also learn by observing others. We watch people, see what happens to them, and imitate their behavior. Modeling, he called it.
So we don't have to experience the reward or punishment ourselves. We can learn just by watching someone else.
Exactly. Think how much kids learn just by watching parents, siblings, teachers, even characters on TV.
That's huge. So the behavioral perspective, overall, powerful ideas about learning, right?
Absolutely. Watson and Skinner's principles are incredibly influential, used in therapy, education, all sorts of areas.
But are there downsides? Criticisms?
Yeah, some argue it can be a bit too simplistic, maybe ignoring the role of thoughts, feelings, or even genetics in shaping who we are. It focuses so much on the external.
Okay. So if behaviorism looks outside, the cognitive perspective takes us back inside the head.
Right. This perspective is all about mental processes, thinking, knowing, understanding, problem solving, how we mentally represent and make sense of the world.
And the giant here is Jean Piaget.
Definitely. Piaget's theory of cognitive development was revolutionary. He saw children as active learners, constructing their understanding through these mental structures he called schemas.
Schemas, like mental categories or concepts.
Exactly, frameworks for organizing information. And he said we adapt these schemas through two processes, assimilation and accommodation.
Okay, what's the difference?
Assimilation is when you fit new information into an existing schema, like a toddler seeing a zebra for the first time and calling it a horse.
Okay, fix the existing horse schema.
Right. But accommodation is when you have to change your schema or create a new one because the new information just doesn't fit. So the child learns zebras are different from horses and adjusts their understanding.
Got it. So it's this constant process of fitting things in or adjusting the mental framework. How does this compare to the behaviorists?
It's a fundamental difference, isn't it? Piaget was focused on those internal mental changes, how thinking quality changes. Behaviorists focused on observable actions and external stimuli.
And Piaget's theory, while influential, it's also been debated, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. People have questioned his stage timelines. Some skills might appear earlier than he thought, and there's criticism that maybe he didn't pay enough attention to social and cultural influences on thinking.
Right. So within the cognitive perspective, there are also information processing approaches. How do they fit in?
They offer a slightly different model. Instead of distinct stages, they often compare the mind to a computer, focusing on how we take in, store, and use information.
Like hardware and software.
Kind of. Development is seen more as gradual improvements in things like processing speed, memory capacity, efficiency, quantitative changes, rather than the big qualitative shifts Piaget described.
So getting better at handling information over time.
Yeah. And there are also neo-Piagetian theories that try to sort of blend Piaget's ideas with this information processing view. They suggest cognitive skills might develop at different speeds in different areas.
Interesting. What's the overall value of these approaches?
They're really good at breaking down the specific processes involved in thinking, attention, memory, etc. But sometimes they're critiqued for maybe not seeing the big picture of development or like early behaviorism, maybe underplaying social context.
And then there's cognitive neuroscience, bringing the actual brain into it.
Exactly. This looks at the brain activity underlying cognition, using tools like EEG, fMRI scans.
Brain imaging.
Right, to see how brain structures and activity relate to thinking, learning, problem solving.
And this connects to understanding developmental differences.
It can, yes. For example, some research suggests differences in brain structure or function might be linked to conditions like autism spectrum disorder. Identifying these things could potentially lead to earlier support. It also helps pinpoint genes linked to certain disorders or abilities.
So it gives us a biological lens on cognition, strengths and weaknesses.
Huge strength is using sophisticated methods to link brain and behavior, understanding typical and atypical development. A potential limitation is that sometimes it's better at describing brain activity than fully explaining the why behind the developmental process itself.
Okay, let's zoom out again now. The contextual perspective. This seems to broaden the view quite a bit.
It really does. The core idea here is that development doesn't happen in isolation. It's a product of the constant interplay between the individual and their environment, their physical world, social world, cultural world.
It all matters.
Absolutely. And Yuri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological approach is key here.
Explain that one.
He pictured the environment as a set of nested layers, all influencing the child simultaneously. There's the immediate setting, like family and school.
A microsystem.
Right. Then connections between those settings, the mesosystem. Then broader influences like community structures, the exosystem. And then overarching cultural values and laws, the macrosystem. And finally, the chronosystem, the influence of time and historical context.
Wow. Okay. So it's like ripples in a pond spreading outwards, but they all interact.
Exactly. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of all these levels. You can't understand development by just looking at the child or just the family. You need the whole context.
And culture is a big part of that context.
A huge part. Think about differences between, say, individualistic cultures that emphasize personal achievement and uniqueness versus collectivistic cultures that prioritize group harmony and interdependence. Those values shape development profoundly.
So Bronfenbrenner's model at strength
Yeah.
is showing those multiple layers.
Definitely. It's a powerful reminder that environment is complex and multi-layered. A potential criticism is that maybe sometimes it doesn't give enough detailed focus to the biological side of the equation.
And also within this contextual view, we have Lev Vygotsky, sociocultural theory.
Yes, Vygotsky. His big emphasis was on social interaction and culture as the engines of cognitive development. He argued that learning happens first on a social level, between people, and then gets internalized by the child.
So we learn through collaborating and interacting with others who are more knowledgeable within our specific cultural setting.
Precisely. Things like language, cultural tools, social customs, they all shape how we learn to think.
And Vygotsky's ideas seem really relevant today.
Hugely influential, especially in education. His work highlights just how central social and cultural contexts are to development. It's gained a lot of traction.
Okay, one last perspective.
Uh-huh.
The evolutionary perspective. This one looks way back, doesn't it?
It does. It focuses on how our genetic inheritance from our ancestors influences behavior. The idea is that certain traits or behaviors might be common because they helped our ancestors survive and reproduce.
Nature over nurture, perhaps.
Uh-huh.
Or the interaction.
More the interaction, but with a strong emphasis on the biological and genetic roots shaped by evolution. It looks at how our genes might predispose us towards certain developmental paths or behaviors.
What are the main pros and cons of looking at development through this evolutionary lens?
Well, its strength is grounding our understanding in basic genetic and biological processes shaped over millennia. A limitation often cited is that it might not give enough weight to the immediate environmental and social factors that shape individual development right now.
So after touring all five, psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, contextual, evolutionary, it really drives home that first point, doesn't it? No single perspective has all the answers.
Not at all. Each offers a valuable but different angle. They focus on different aspects of development based on different core ideas.
Like different tools in a toolbox. You wouldn't use a hammer for every job.
Exactly. The best understanding comes from being able to draw on multiple perspectives. Seeing how inner conflicts, learning experiences, thought processes, social context, and our evolutionary heritage might all play a role gives you a much richer, more complete picture.
Okay, so these perspectives guide how we think about development. But how do we actually study it? Let's talk about research methods.
Crucial. It all hinges on the scientific method, really. Generally, you start by identifying a question.
Like, does watching violent TV make kids more aggressive?
Right. Then you formulate an explanation, often based on one of those theories we discussed. And then, critically, you conduct research to see if your explanation holds up.
So theories provide the framework.
Yes, they help organize what we see and generate predictions. And those specific testable predictions are called hypotheses.
Like, children who watch more violent TV will show more aggressive behavior on the playground.
Exactly. And to test that, you need to operationalize your terms. Define violent TV and aggressive behavior in ways you can actually measure.
Okay. So what kinds of research do developmentalists use? You mentioned correlational research earlier.
Right. Correlational research looks for relationships between variables. Does one thing tend to go up when another goes up or down?
But it doesn't prove cause and effect, you said.
Absolutely. Critical point. Correlation tells you two things are linked, but not why. Maybe A causes B, maybe B causes A, or maybe some third factor causes both. The strength and direction are measured by the correlation coefficient, from plus 1.0 to macular 1.0.
What are some ways to do correlational research?
You could use naturalistic observation, just watching kids in their natural environment, like the playground example. Ethnography is used when researchers want to understand a specific culture or group from the inside. Case studies involve in-depth investigation of one person or a small group. And survey research uses questionnaires to ask a large sample of people about their attitudes or behaviors.
Okay, but if you do want to find cause and effect,
Then you need experimental research. This is where the researcher deliberately manipulates something, the independent variable, to see if it causes a change in something else, the dependent variable.
so in our TV example, you might have one group of kids watch violent cartoons and another group watch nonviolent ones.
Exactly. That's the manipulation. The type of cartoon is the independent variable. Then you'd measure their aggressive behavior, the dependent variable, and compare the groups.
And you'd need a control group, the ones watching nonviolent cartoons.
Right. And crucially, you need random assignment. Each child has an equal chance of being in either group. That helps ensure the groups are similar to begin with, so any difference you find is likely due to the cartoons, not some pre-existing difference.
Makes sense. And repeating studies is important too. Replication.
Very important. One study finding something is interesting, but you want to see if others can replicate it. Meta-analysis is a powerful tool here too.
Yeah.
It statistically combines the results from many studies on the same topic.
Where does this research usually happen? In labs or out in the real world?
Both. Laboratory studies offer lots of control, but might not reflect real life perfectly. Field studies happen in natural settings, like homes or schools, which increases realism but reduces control.
And is the goal always just to understand basic processes? Or is some research more practical?
Good distinction. Theoretical research aims to test theories and expand scientific knowledge. Applied research is geared toward solving immediate practical problems like finding the best way to teach reading or prevent bullying. And developmental research often informs public policy too.
How do researchers study change over time specifically?
Yes. The main strategies are longitudinal studies following the same group of people for months or years.
To see how they change individually.
Right, or cross-sectional studies comparing different age groups at the same time. That's quicker, but you're comparing different people, not tracking individual change.
Okay.
And then sequential studies try to combine both, following several different age groups over time. It's complex, but powerful.
So when we read about a study, what should we be looking for to evaluate it critically?
Good question you want to ask. Is it grounded in theory? Have the findings been replicated? Can we generalize the results to other kids? Were the methods sound? Was the study long enough to capture real developmental change?
Lots to consider. And finally, ethics. Especially with children, this has to be paramount.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Key principles include protecting participants from any physical or psychological harm,
Right.
obtaining informed consent, usually from parents or guardians, and often assent from the child too, depending on age. If deception is absolutely necessary, it must be justified and cause no harm, with debriefing afterwards. And maintaining participant privacy and confidentiality is essential.
It's a huge responsibility.
It really is.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that understanding child development isn't straightforward. It's this intricate puzzle.
Absolutely. And there's no single key, like we said. Each perspective, psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, contextual, evolutionary, gives us valuable insights. They highlight different facets of that incredible journey.
And knowing about these perspectives, plus the research methods used to study them, really equips you to understand that journey in a much deeper, more nuanced way.
It really does. It makes you think, doesn't it? Consider your own childhood. How might you view some of your own experiences differently if you looked at them through, say, a behavioral lens versus a contextual one?
That's a fascinating thought to leave with, applying these big ideas to our own personal histories.
It brings it all home, you know? Makes you realize how all these forces might have played a part in shaping who you are today.